All right, good morning, Buckeyes. Let's go ahead and get started. I brought in a guest as promised, so Evie's here. You want to say hi? So she says hello. We brought in an expert for this morning. I hope you guys are doing well. If you can, turn on the cameras. It's great to see you guys. You can work on our beach theme today. You can put the beach behind you. In chat, I put on some nice calming ocean sounds. You can listen to them now, maybe while you're studying, doing things like that later on. You can have those up there too. So hopefully you guys are doing well. It's hard to imagine that we started this class in January in a classroom. It was cold and gray, and now we're ending up at a beach, and we're teaching class virtually. So we have kind of this weird thing going on, something very different than when we started. But I appreciate you guys hanging with me and making our way through. So it is the last official class for us. So with that being the case, what I want to do is continue to cover the rest of the material that we need to for the exam, but also too to make sure that we take care of announcements, give you guys a chance to ask any questions. You can even ask questions of Evie here in just a moment too. So starting first with what we have for our announcements. And just a second here, let me get set up. All right, so first off, the quiz and module outline number 5 were due before class today. Seems like we were in good shape there. Got them uploaded to Carmen. Seemed like Carmen didn't cause too many problems. So looking forward to looking at those. My plan is to have everything graded, including these before your final. So I'll try to do the best I can to make that happen so that you know how many points you need to get if you're shooting for a certain grade on that final. You do the calculations of what you need to get in order to reach the threshold. Remember, so the syllabus has the points and what you need to get, how many points you need to get for each grade. So you can take a look at that. So again, I'll hopefully get these all graded for us and back to you quickly. Also, too, the music extra credit is now officially finished, so that was due before class as well. So we're kind of, as you can see, starting to wrap things up and continue with wrapping things up. The last day for tutoring is tomorrow. So please make sure if you want to get that last tutoring session in that you're doing that. After I complete grading the quizzes, I will then account for the tutoring extra credit and just quiz grades at that point. So get an email from me indicating if I adjusted your quiz grade. So keep in mind that's when that final correction is going to happen. So again, lots of stuff was turned in. Module outline number 5, quiz number 5, extra credit was turned in. You have one last chat for tutoring tomorrow. Continuing on with announcements, just reminding you guys of things again. The last day to complete the SONA research credits is this Sunday by 5 p.m. So that means all research credits, either through SONA, the alternative written assignments, the under 18 assignments, all that needs to be done and completed by 5 o'clock. There's nothing that's going to be accepted past then. So all research is due by then. Whatever's in at that point is the final piece. There's no extensions past that. As a reminder, please take a moment to complete the SEIs, this evaluations of classes, evaluations of instructors. It's, again, super helpful to have that feedback. I always look at it, I always think about classes once they're all wrapped up and take notes about how to improve things, take notes where things went well. So please take some time to do that. Again, it really requires a strong response from students to know how class really went and how to make adjustments. All right, continue on with announcements. This may be the biggest one, the key one for us. Your answer sheet for exam number 5 is due to Carmen by 12:05 on May 1st. So 12:05 would be the end if we were taking our exam in the classroom. So that's why we have that particular time. What I'll do is I'll release the exam about 24 hours before it's due. So about this time next Thursday, I'll release it. That gives you a chance to download it. You can take the exam and then upload the score sheet when you're done. Remember, with the exam, you can only use the notes, the book, lectures, but you cannot use the internet, use help from others. So please make sure that you're keeping in mind that it's open in that sense, but it's not open to everything. If you do have any questions while you're taking the exam, please feel free to email me. If you have any towards the end of wrapping up the exam, I will be in the Zoom classroom starting at 10:30 on May 1st if you have any kind of last questions or want to check in with me about anything class related. Lastly, just to help you kind of understand how things will wrap up, it will take me a little bit to get to the final exams graded. The reason why this is kind of twofold. One is it takes longer because I hand grade the exams. I don't have the Scantron machine. It's quarantined at school. So it takes me a little while to make sure I get things matched to a key correctly. I want to make sure I do a good job for that. Don't want to make a mistake. And secondly, what I do is I calculate your final grade and post your exam together. So that piece takes a little bit longer to get the whole thing set up. But once you get that last exam grade, you'll also get your final grade all together then. So you'll be all set. You can check it out, make sure everything looks good. Again, once that exam is turned in, all points are finalized at that time, unless for some reason you can identify a clerical error, in which case I'm happy to help you out with that. So again, just kind of reviewing information, want to make sure we're on the same page and set with things. So with that being said, I want to see if you guys had any questions about anything, check in on things. You're welcome to ask me questions. You're welcome to ask our guest celebrity Evie questions if you'd like. So I will wait here for a moment, see what questions you guys might have. And you're welcome to either jump in and share them through the chat or through the audio piece here. And if you're all good, feel free to message me saying that that's the case, that you're situated and ready to go. Checking in. See over here. All good. I got thumbs up. You can get thumbs up. All good. Oh, people seem to be all set. All right, guys, it's your last chance to ask Evie anything. Thank you. Glasses are awesome. I have to take them off though because I can't see anything.
I can see things.
You can see things? You must have better vision than I do.
Mostly mine aren't as dark as yours.
Oh, you don't think they're as dark?
Yeah.
All right. Should we get to teaching? Okay. Why don't you wave goodbye to everyone? All right. Thanks, buddy. All right. Time to get down to business, but I promised you an Evie visit, so she made a point of coming to hang out. I think she just wanted to wear sunglasses and be on Zoom. That's all she really wanted. So let's keep jamming away. What we're going to do is we're going to finish talking about therapy. We identified all the different mood disorders, personality disorders earlier, so now we're going to talk about how we address these, and then spend as much time as we can wrapping things up with talking about happiness as well. So good kind of positive ending for us here. Okay. So where we were talking about, where we left off on Tuesday, was talking about exposure therapy. And the overarching idea behind this is this going through this process of exposing someone to a situation or an experience that causes them anxiety. And we know that conditions get worse when individuals avoid something that's feared, because that reinforcement of avoiding it causes a kind of reduction in anxiety. It becomes kind of that reinforcing that behavior of, hey, I don't want to be in this experience. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get out of it. And so because of that, it makes the situation only that much worse, because then you won't be able to take care of the things that you need to do in some cases. And so what a therapist will do with exposure therapy is they'll go through and they'll expose that client to that particular feared situation. And the trick about this therapy is that they won't let the client back out of it. Okay, so what they'll do is they'll move the client through in a slow, steady progression where they're going to expose the client to this situation slowly and wait for that anxiety to start occurring, but then wait for that anxiety to subside before doing the next step. But the idea here is they don't just let that client just jump right out of the experience and reinforce that leaving behavior. And ultimately what happens here is a person can start to habituate to the anxiety itself, that feared situation. And so ultimately this is kind of captured by this idea of the systematic desensitization. Okay, so the idea is that you start to become less sensitive, less anxious with these experiences, and so therefore you're able to be more confident, be able to take them on, do the things that you need to. So I gave you the example of Katie working with a client who had to give speeches, had to give presentations as part of her job, and she was very anxious about doing this. And so they did this exposure therapy where they started initially just kind of even thinking about it, helping the client reduce their anxiety, just thinking about giving the presentation. Then they got more into visualizing giving the presentation, again, visualizing until the client got anxious and then kind of slowing down, dealing with that anxiety, but then continue to move forward, eventually to the point where the client was giving speeches to Katie in their office, kind of going through practice demonstrations, things like that, where they got the client more and more comfortable with that experience. And where we left off on Tuesday was a video of the kind of rather tough guy that was afraid of even just a pit bull puppy. And so I want to go back and process that video a bit more. I told us that we would be doing this. And I want to first think about what were some of the aspects of that situation where you saw that was dysfunctional for him. Okay, where was it causing distress? Where was it problematic for him? Okay, remember that goes back to defining and thinking about something's a psychological disorder. Where do we see examples of or evidence for saying it was a psychological disorder for him? Okay, so we got a great first response over chat. So he wasn't able to go to the park with his family. this was really hard on him. You could see how he's very upset about this, that he couldn't be connected with his family. Even when they went for walks, he wasn't really connected with them. He's kind of, on his ATV by himself. So great start. Other ways that we saw it as being problematic for him, where it was causing it to be a dysfunction. And let's get 2 or 3 of these, because I think there's a lot of different pieces to it. Okay, so you saw that the fear would take him over. Okay, so he wasn't able to function as he needed to. He became so concerned, so afraid of these animals that he couldn't do what he needed to. Okay, so absolutely, that fear was a huge component for him, even kind of getting him to break down in tears. So great response. He didn't really enjoy going out all that much. You could see that he just didn't feel comfortable being out. It just wasn't something that was positive for him, especially, going back to, he couldn't go out with his family. So he didn't really feel comfortable just kind of out in nature because dogs might be out there. Okay? Anything else that you notice as being demonstration of dysfunction for him? One of the things I always note is that the scene where he won't wash someone's car because there's a dog in the car. Okay, even to that point, he's directly taking away money from his own business because of this fear. So even in kind of very simple monetary terms, we see that happen as well. You see that he can't just walk around with others, not getting exercise. He's having to use a 4-wheeler for walks. Okay, that's not productive for him. It's not comforting and rejuvenating. So thinking about the fact that he has this dysfunction, where do we see that exposure therapy occurred? So what were some of the aspects of exposure therapy that you noticed as we were watching the video? Okay, what were some aspects of this desensitization that he went through? Some things that you noticed about this exposure therapy process. So I think there's a great first response thing about it. He was forced to pet the puppy. Okay, so it was kind of remarkable that he got so freaked out. It seems like he's such a big, tough guy, and he got all worried and freaked out by this little puppy. But you can see that, as Nina's saying perfectly, he was forced to pet the dog. The therapist didn't let him out of that experience, but they kind of worked into it slowly. You could see, the dog got a little bit closer, and then the therapist, would help him kind of process that anxiety. And I think another great point that Ellie's making is that the therapist also with this allowed him to go at his own pace. Okay, so she didn't throw him all the way in, but let him go through. But she also at the same time didn't let him go backwards. I think another great point here, and actually this will feed into what we'll talk about here soon, that Sophia is saying, is that she's also reinforced that he wasn't a wimp. And this is part of changing his cognitions during that experience. So great thing to be thinking about, because cognition is the way someone thinks as they're going through this exposure therapy is also critically important. Okay, so any other aspects you guys can identify in terms of where he was demonstrating this exposure therapy, that process? You guys are giving great responses this morning. I super appreciate it. Maybe we should have gone to the beach right away. Maybe it's more mellow and better for thinking things through. Okay, other places that you saw this exposure therapy happening or aspects of it. So I think you've captured it well. If you have other thoughts, jump in. I'll be happy to share them with everyone. But we saw that they went through that process where he faced his fear. The therapist helped him in each of the different steps kind of be calming and kind of help him get through it without letting him go backwards. And what we see is that when we tie exposure therapy to also working with cognitions, working with behaviors, we can see that we can really have a strong impact for improving that person's health. And so what we're going to turn into is talking a bit more now about cognitive therapies. And we're going to see how it relates to that scenario we just talked about. And we'll talk about how it also ties into behavioral therapies as well. So cognitive therapy on its own, just strictly thinking about this, is how people alter the negative thinking that worsens depression and anxiety. So we define cognitive therapy. We talk about it here as therapy designed to help people alter their negative thinking. Okay, so thinking that's harmful towards them, thinking that perpetuates negative actions, feeling that perpetuates anxiety, sadness, depression in this case, that negative perception and thought processes, that's what a therapist is going to target in this type of therapy. And what the therapist does specifically in this case is the therapist might suggest other thoughts that the clients could have about their lives, or at least point out where their clients jump into conclusions that make them feel worse. Okay, so the therapist really here is going to focus on these negative cognitions and how to change them. And the therapist will do this primarily, as you're pointing out here, in two different ways. The first is that they'll try to suggest other thoughts that the client could have. So it might be that you can imagine being a student and you don't do so well on an exam. And working with a therapist, they might say, well, rather than saying that you're a bad student, how could you kind of reframe this in a way that's more positive, less harsh on yourself? You might say, well, I understand where I'm at with class. I can make these improvements to do better. Or, I really had a lot going on. So actually I did pretty well considering I'm in the middle of a virus. I'm trying to do all kinds of other things. I'm quarantined. This is a really hard experience to go through. Let me think about things that way, where I have a little more positive thinking, where I'm not making negative attributions to things directly related back to myself. Alternatively, too, the therapist will point out when the client's jumping to an unfair conclusion that's harmful to them. And that was a great point to make related to the video. He says I'm a wuss, he says I'm a wimp. These are things I'm sure he doesn't want to feel at all. He doesn't want to identify with that at all. And the therapist is saying, no, you're jumping to a conclusion that's making this more more stressful. That experience now suddenly is getting worse because you're thinking that way. Rather, think of yourself as strong, that you can do this. So the therapist is directly challenging the cognitions that he's having. Okay, might come into a therapist's office saying you just totally tanked an exam, you're a horrible student, you shouldn't be even in classes, all those negative cognitions, and the therapist might say, well, how'd you do on the previous exam? I might say, oh, I did pretty well. Well, how are you doing in other classes? Oh, A's, B's. And I'd say, well, hey, is this really mean that you're a bad student just because you had one bad exam? Or is it just that it was a bad exam? And so when we get into kind of the details of this approach, thinking about both of these pieces, again, what happens with the cognitive therapy focused on changing someone's thought processes is it'll challenge irrational beliefs and assumptions. Maybe the assumption, for example, that someone didn't contact you because they didn't like you, rather than saying, well, maybe that's a bad assumption. Maybe they didn't contact you because they're busy or something else is going on. Or challenging these irrational beliefs where you're thinking about things in a way that doesn't make any sense at all. Okay, so thinking that the coronavirus will last for forever. Okay, so they might say, well, why do you feel that way? This isn't going to be with us forever. They're going to correct cognitive distortions. So these distortions are taking experiences that individuals might have and really kind of manipulating them into a way that's really not consistent at all with things. Okay, so where they're viewing relationships as negative when in fact they might be more positive. Or someone saying, hey, I failed at everything because I did one thing wrong, when in fact, no, that's not the case at all. And two, just like with humanistic therapy, they're going to practice healthier thinking. So they help the client get towards being successful, doing the things that they need to by practicing healthy thinking before facing a stressor or disappointment or frustration. So they'll be more proactive in this case, meaning kind of working forward. So the idea here is they might say, well, hey, next time you take an exam, what are some cognitions you can have before the exam? You might say, okay, well, I studied for it, I practiced with it, I can do the best I can, I'm a good student, thinking positively. Or maybe next time they have that stressor, maybe they're having a bad day at work, maybe they know that their employment's kind of tough, hard to manage sometimes, then maybe they say, okay, well, how can I be more positive about work? What are some more positive cognitive thoughts that I can have? And maybe say, hey, this is causing me to grow, or, this is a stepping stone towards the things I really want to do. Again, dealing with that disappointment, going, okay, things aren't always going to work out the way we want them to. How do I change that thought process for when things don't work out the way that I want them to? So cognitive therapy is a huge piece. It's very, very much a focus on psychology in terms of therapy, clinical therapy especially. Therapists are generally trained in terms of cognitive therapies. Again, though, taking that eclectic approach, bringing in multiple different perspectives. But before we talk about cognitive behavioral therapy, I'll pause here to see if you have questions about cognitive therapy itself, because I'll make sure we have a good foundation here before adding a bit more. So what therapists will do is, again, they'll look for multiple approaches to best help their clients. And one of the approaches we oftentimes see is this idea of cognitive behavioral therapy. And so in fact, Katie, as a therapist, practices this all the time. And we're going to see how this cognitive behavioral therapy actually goes back to our mother with OCD. So we're applying this cognitive behavioral therapy approach towards understanding how she sought treatment. And cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, works to challenge both the cognitions and behaviors that are part of a mental health disorder. Okay, so we're going to add both pieces to it now. We're going to challenge both the thought processes, so how someone views themselves, the way they're interpreting harmful or frustrating situations, and they're also going to start to address the behavioral piece. So how can they change that person's behavior to make it more in line with the behaviors that that person wants, or more healthy behaviors that helps that person grow. And so you see the strength of really kind of these two core areas of therapy coming together in cognitive behavioral therapy. And so we'll take things like people with OCD, and they have both cognitive and behavioral components of the mental health disorder. Yeah, they have the cognitive components of those obtrusive thoughts that are jumping into their heads, okay, those worries that suddenly come on, and they have the behavioral component of feeling like they have to do some kind of ritual, some type of behavior to deal with those obsessions that are popping into their head. So using cognitive behavioral therapy, people with OCD are led to resist the urge to act on their compulsions, so changing their behavior, as well as learning to manage their obsessive thinking. Okay, so being worried about all those intrusive thoughts, things that they might have done, afraid that they injured someone, afraid that someone's harmed, afraid that they didn't lock the doors, afraid that they've gotten germs on them. Help them understand what those obsessions are coming from and how to manage those. And so in this case, you see with working with both of these components, the behaviors and the thought processes, they can be most successful. If they're only dealing with one, it may not provide the best therapy for these individuals. So we could liken this to our student taking an exam. We can change both the cognitions, okay, so changing the thought patterns in terms of being more comfortable taking the exam, more reassured. But we also might change some of the behaviors. So instead of that behavior of self-handicapping by studying at the last minute or trying to do multiple things while studying, a therapist might say, well, hey, let's start putting a structure together so that you develop good habits, good studying practices, so that you have positive behaviors that help you cause to be more successful rather than harming yourself. So I'm going to show you the video of our mother with OCD. You guys saw what OCD looked like in her experience with the symptoms. Now we're going to see what happens when she's engaged in cognitive behavioral therapy. And so when we watch the video, I'm going to come back to ask you guys, what are some ways the therapist worked on the cognitive piece, her compulsions, and what are some ways the therapist worked on the behavioral piece in terms of acting out certain rituals? Okay, so look for both of those pieces as we watch the video. Okay, so give me just a moment to set that up.
Stephanie's fear of contamination has colonised every aspect of her life. Her whole house is subject to a decontamination ritual as strict as the one she uses on herself.
I have to clean in a certain way, and I start at the front door and I work backward. Once I start cleaning, I can't stop, and I have to decontaminate in the perfect way. Nothing can go wrong. If it does, the contamination jumps to something else. It's really
Hey guys, thanks for letting me know you're having problems with it. Let me make some adjustments and see if we can get it going correctly here. So hang on 1 second. All right, so let me know if this runs better for you guys. Thanks for being patient with things.
Stephanie's fear of contamination has colonised every aspect of her life. Her whole house is subject to a decontamination ritual as strict as the one she uses on herself.
I have to clean in a certain way, and I start at the front door and I work backward. Once I start cleaning, I can't stop, and I have to decontaminate in the perfect way, like nothing can go wrong. If it does, the contamination jumps to something else. It's really frightening when something gets contaminated because you know it's only a matter of time before it takes over everything.
Stephanie's starting her therapy. She's been taking Prozac, which often helps OCD, but it hasn't been enough. Dr. Yadin has come to begin cognitive behavioural therapy. Today, Stephanie's going to bring in the mail, which she hasn't done for a year.
Okay. So how nervous is this making you? Give me a number.
It's 40 right now.
40 right now? That's
Maybe
good.
30. It's okay.
It's low? Good.
Yeah.
Excellent.
It makes me nervous to put it down. I don't want to put it down anywhere.
Okay, I will help you.
For Stephanie, who has a terror of contamination from bodily fluids, the thought of handling envelopes, which someone might have licked shut, is particularly repugnant.
Is recognizable.
The idea is to expose Stephanie to situations that cause her anxiety, but then prevent her from doing the compulsive cleaning rituals she normally would do to contain it.
40, maybe. Getting out of 40.
Okay, good. Good. Just go for it. Just pounce on it. Don't be too careful. Good. Excellent. All right. And now that you've done this, your hands are contaminated. Is it?
It's difficult.
Is it difficult? How difficult, Stephanie?
50.
At 50? That's okay. You can tolerate it. It's all right. Remember, I told you it's going to be very difficult for you. Okay? What could you touch? I mean, touching Jake would be too hard for you right now, would it? Okay, what can you touch that's not that hard? Your
The
hair?
couch.
The couch? You could touch the couch?
The back of the couch.
Okay, so let's do that. Ready? Good. And when you do exposures, I would like you to touch the couch everywhere.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I know it's hard for you. Okay. Can I do something to help with the anxiety?
Can you touch the couch first?
Yes, absolutely. I want you to touch it like this, okay?
Okay.
Stephanie's contaminated her hands, and now Dr. Yadin wants her to spread the contamination around.
Now that's very difficult for you, but you're able to do it.
It's better.
It is better already?
Yeah.
Good. You know, the anticipation usually makes it worse.
Yeah.
So you want to pounce on it as fast as you can. So you see what happens is, and the reason it's called exposures is it's the things you've been avoiding and you don't get a chance to test. You were very courageous already. Might as well capitalize on it.
Stephanie has to spread the alien germs she imagines are on the letter all over the couch.
I'm going to move so that you can do it.
Infecting the couch is one thing, but can Stephanie go one stage further and expose her son Jake to the germs?
Good. I like the energy that you're showing going towards...
I'm angry at it.
You angry at the OCD? Good. I like that. I want you to be angry at the OCD, not at yourself.
Yeah.
Okay? I'm angry at your OCD too. It's ruining your life.
Yeah.
I want us both to be able to...
I can handle Jake.
You can?
Yeah. I can handle
Let's
Jake.
do it.
Come here, honey. Oh, well, maybe not.
Why?
Are you sure it's okay?
It's wonderful.
You sure it's
It is
all right to do
okay.
it?
It's okay to do it. Yes, I'm positive.
It won't
it's
harm
okay.
him.
When we go to the higher items, I won't reassure you, but for the first time, absolutely.
I'm going to put him on the couch.
Good. Good.
Put him on the couch.
Just hold him for a little while. Yeah, just hold him for a little while. Hi, Mommy. Hi, Mommy. How anxious
It's
are
okay,
you?
though. It's okay to put him on the couch.
It is okay to put him on the couch. It is. Because remember, you just touched And you,
Okay.
we're just doing an exposure, and it's
I'm not a bad mother if I do that.
you're asking me for reassurance.
Okay.
You're okay? Hi, Jake. He doesn't know me very well. Good. All right. How does it feel? What are your suds? I'm nervous.
60 going down.
75% of people with OCD show some improvement with cognitive behavioral therapy.
Yes.
Our experience with other people who have this kind of OCD are that many of them will get a lot better by the end of treatment.
No, it's making me feel free.
Stephanie has been through 9 sessions of her therapy now.
I'm well on my way to life again and have made incredible progress in many small ways.
One of the most important things is that she can now let Jake pick things off the ground and behave like a normal child while she behaves like a normal mother.
I've been able to reorganize in my mind what is something to be fearful of and what is not. Jake and I are a team, and we're out there discovering together. Because for a year, I stopped experiencing things and looking at things.
Bark. Gotta look for more of those, see if you see any. See if you find any.
Something that I never would have been able to do before, I can do without even thinking about it.
Oops. You all right,
I
bud?
can let spontaneous things happen. You can call that a cure, but the OCD's not gone. The obsessions, gosh, the obsessions maybe are gone. The obsessions are maybe still there. I don't know. It's hard to say when you become, who is normal anyway?
All right, so let's go ahead and process that video and thinking about the cognitive behavioral therapy that the mother went through. So what were some ways that the therapist challenged her cognitions? And what were some of the ways the therapist worked with her behaviors, especially in terms of that exposure therapy? So breaking down the experience that she went through in terms of cognitive behavioral therapy, what was the cognitive part, what was the behavioral parts that you noticed? Okay, so she made her mother handle she made the mother handle the mail. What piece would that be, the cognitive or the behavioral? All right, so you'd say that absolutely having the mother handle mail was a behavioral one. So she was exposing the mother to the germs that we know she was very afraid of. So the contamination maybe from someone licking the envelope or other people handling the mail. And so she's exposing the mother to doing this, making her handle the mail, making her bring in the mail. Okay, so absolutely, that was one of the behavioral pieces. What are some other cognitive behavioral pieces as part of the CBT the mother went through? Okay, so we can see that Nick is asking, is part of that cognitive therapy the positive encouragement? Yes, that's part of it. So the idea here is that she's providing support as you go through the behavioral piece. So providing support with the anxiety the mother was feeling as she was trying to hold the mail, to rub the mail on the sofa. We also saw the cognitive piece too, where she was trying to encourage the mother, saying that she could handle this, to give her kind of positive cognitions, positive thoughts as she was taking on these challenges with the behavioral therapy. So you saw these things kind of go hand in hand together. Okay, so what other examples of cognitive and behavioral pieces of the therapy that she went through? You guys have done a nice job identifying a few pieces already. All right, so great response in terms of the cognitive piece, changing that misperception. So again, that cognitive distortion that she'd be a bad mother if Jake was exposed to any kind of germs, and pointing out that, you know, Jake being on the sofa was fine. That's a great example of where that cognitive piece is coming in, you know, reinforcing to the mom what it means to be a good mom, and that that's not being a bad mom if the child gets exposed to germs. That's just part of how kind of kids develop, how they grow up. So great response. Okay? Other cognitive behavioral pieces. Let's get kind of 2 or 3 other thoughts. Okay, so what were some other aspects where they challenged the mother's cognitions? They worked with her to do the behavioral therapy, especially the exposure piece. What were some other aspects?
Wouldn't part of it be like systematic desensitization? I know it's an exposure therapy, but like they did start out really small with different behaviors to change. And then she got more and more extreme with like touching the couch, and then with touching her son and putting her son on the couch. So is that would be part of it too?
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You hit it right in the head with that exposure therapy. Part of that is systematic desensitization. She took something that was kind of easier for her to do and kind of kept going with it. So absolutely, this idea that she started just getting the mail, then touching the mail, rubbing the mail, and getting all the way to kind of what they call kind of high value behavior or high value target, where she was holding Jake while she knew that, you know, in her mind, she was contaminated with these germs from the mail. So absolutely, that's a big piece of what they went through. And they did a really nice demonstration of that in that short period of time. And that was really great for her. I mean, to go through that to get to the point where she's holding Jake. And you can see that she's really anxious. She's at that 60 out of 100. But you have the right idea in terms of picking up on that behavioral piece. Okay, so nicely done. Anything else that you can add, especially in terms of kind of the cognitive pieces? Anything else you noticed there? So I think what we see is that the therapist worked to help change the mom's cognition, saying it's not bad. She's not a bad mom if Jake gets exposed to germs. You know, I think you could also tell that she had worked with the therapist to have a different framing in terms of what's normal for Jake. You know, she mentions at the end that she and Jake are a team and they need to explore the world. So I think it kind of reframed the way that she interacted with Jake and made a more positive way of doing it. And so you see that. I also wanted to note, too, that if you're listening to it carefully, she also was on Prozac. And so we see there's really this eclectic approach of using this cognitive behavioral therapy, which involves both cognitive and behavioral pieces together, but also, too, that in order to help her, she needed also medication to help modify the neurotransmitters in her brain to be able to help with this. So we see that, you know, it has a biological basis in it as well. So before we talk about our last piece in terms of therapy and talk about preventing psychological disorders, let me just kind of pause just a moment, see if we have any questions about cognitive therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy, because we did kind of a lot with both of these pieces. So one of the last pieces I want to talk about is being a little more preventative focused. So far we're talking about dealing with disorders. What I want to talk a little about is how individuals can support themselves, how they can avoid some of these psychological disorders. And we'll go through this a little bit quickly, and don't worry about getting all the information down, but take away kind of the larger piece of this. So we see is that in some cases, people show a trait of resilience. They say, survive stress without developing mental health disorders. We all go through different stressors. We're going through one that's very stressful now in terms of being quarantined because of the pandemic. We see that some individuals will progress through this without much mental health concern. They're able to kind of cope with it. Others, it may be more stressful. And what a therapist will do is they'll help the client work to develop this resilience. But this is also something you can help develop on your own. You know, understand how you cope with stress, understand how to develop techniques so these mental health disorders don't develop. So, and this is something you kind of learn over time, something you start to develop as well, but there's therapeutic techniques to help with this. We see too that some traumatized people, in fact, have what we call post-traumatic growth rather than stress. Okay, so they find strength and appreciation for their life. They now have a different view or perspective on their life, so they actually start to grow from this. And they feel like they can now take on bigger challenges because they've gotten through or gotten past whatever is traumatic for them. And so again, this is where that humanistic therapy comes in. This is where we want that individual to grow, even though they've had this traumatic experience. How can you help them get stronger and stronger? So some people, they may hit kind of rock bottom with some type of experience that's related to their PTSD, and now they kind of build themselves back up. Again, that appreciation for life starts to change, knowing how bad it can be, the trauma that they can endure. We see too that community psychologists and social workers will do a lot to help reduce the risk of mental disorders by having several different interventions. And the idea is that they're working here to build a healthier environment. Right? So we see that this is actually happening with OSU a ton. So not only is Ohio State trying to provide resources to both faculty and students in terms of how to learn, how to adapt to being online, but they're also trying to build a healthier environment. And Ohio State's actually done a very good job of this, even prior to COVID, in terms of supporting students, having health be an important focus. I know the faculty have all kinds of different programs they're invited to. But the idea behind this is that they're trying to help with interventions such as helping create support programs for stressed families. Okay, so how can the family deal with stressors, whether it's financial or emotional or family dynamics? And so they might have programs that they go to. It might be information and resources they provide. Community programs provide healthy activities and hope for children. So this is one of the things that's probably the most harmed by us having to be quarantined, is that the community programs such as those over at the YMCA, done through schools, aren't available, or at least they're having to come up with alternatives to try to offer the same services, and that reduces healthy activities. I'm seeing lots of people running, it's great, but we also know that a lot of people work out in the gym, they don't have that activity. And we especially see that these programs are healthy for children. So one of the biggest concerns I have for Evie over the summer is, what are we going to do to keep her healthy and active? She's not going to be able to play with her friends necessarily, at least for some of the summer. We had plans in putting her in different camps and things like that where she could have new experiences, and she's not going to be able to do that. So that's kind of diminished her ability to kind of really thrive and potentially kind of be hopeful in this situation. We also see too that they'll start to build relationships and communication skills training, so they'll help individuals convey the information that they have, the feelings that they're having. They'll help build up communication skills between couples and how also two parents can communicate with their children. And so again, kind of reinforcing these healthy behaviors. And lastly, we'll see that they'll work to reduce poverty and discrimination. So individuals who are in lower status have a higher rate of mental health disorders compared to those in higher status. And largely this isn't related to the lack of resources. It also is that they may be in poverty because of mental health issues. We also see too, individuals like discriminated against will also start to see these mental health disorders be more likely to be present because of that constant discrimination, that constant harm to their self-esteem. And so the ultimate kind of takeaway from this slide is that individuals can become resilient. This resilience is something that gets built up over different exposures to different experiences through working with a therapist. And community psychologists work very hard to create healthy environments. Okay, this is for their larger community. Community psychologists at Ohio State are working to develop a healthy environment for Ohio State students and faculty and staff as we kind of try to navigate our way through this difficult experience. So you can see that there's all kinds of support programs that they're trying to make available, whether it be therapy, whether it be connecting with others, managing stress, managing how to be at home. We see all kinds of articles now about burnout from home, working from home, stressors for students, how to deal with stressors with students. All these are coming up and popping up quite a bit now to help prevent these psychological disorders. So I want to now take us over to do a Kahoot review. So it's kind of a little longer Kahoot review, so please jump in with it. It'll allow us to kind of review some of the last things that we've been talking about. Again, in terms of the psychological disorders, the therapy. We'll go through, we'll do that Kahoot review, and then we'll talk about our last module, module 33. Okay, so let's go ahead, switch over to Kahoot. Give me just a second to switch this up, and we can do a little bit of practicing, kind of review some of these concepts. Right, we give about 1 minute to get the rest of the group in. Alright, so go ahead and get started. If you're jumping a little later, then again, the game pin will always be there during the game. Okay, we have several questions we'll go through and review here. Go ahead and begin. Alright, so nicely done. Suffering from mood disorder, likely depression in this case. Again, thinking that she doesn't have value, have worth. Again, this thought, especially that she should be dead, is very characteristic of individuals who are in severe depression. Okay, so nicely done there. It looks like we're in good shape. Let's go to our next one. Right, so nicely done. We have the majority of class on point here. The idea behind the medical model, kind of reviewing where we're at the beginning of this section of class, is the idea that disorders are treatable and diagnosable. So this idea originally with disorders was that there was kind of something with being possessed by demons, or that this person was a weak character. Instead, that started to shift over to a medical model. So this idea that individuals with mental health disorders are experiencing the same kind of illnesses as you'd experience if you had a cold or some type of other physical illness. So we want to start treating it that way in terms of looking what the symptoms are, diagnosing it, and then coming up with a treatment plan. Okay, so that's the idea behind taking this medical model approach towards understanding psychological disorders. All right, so let's go to our next question. Outstanding, great response. Again, social cognitive, that piece is that cognitive. So in terms of the thinking that they're doing, you guys got it. Thinking about how all these negative moods, maladaptive explanations for failure, so explaining things in a way that's harmful to themselves, self-defeating beliefs, all these are things that a social cognitive theorist would address, try to help someone who's having depression change their way of thinking. Okay, so great job on this question. We can argue that he's suffering from delusions. Okay, so he's believing things that aren't necessarily happening. It'd be hallucinations if he was actually kind of visualizing these things. Instead, he's kind of delusional in the sense that he believes that his reality is that people are laughing at him, people are trying to take things. He's not kind of visualizing things, which would be more about the hallucination. So keep that in mind when we talk about schizophrenia as a different type of symptoms that a schizophrenic individual such as Mr. James would have. Okay, so if you didn't quite get this one, spend a little more time on schizophrenia. I think you'll pick it up quickly when you review it again. All right, question number 5. symptoms of schizophrenia. Remember, when we talk about negative in this case, it means an absence of healthy behaviors. Positive symptoms of schizophrenia show an absence of the presence of problematic behaviors. So positive symptoms of schizophrenia is a demonstration of problematic behaviors. In this case, we would say it's a negative symptom of being a motionless body because it's lacking a healthy behavior. We want to be moving up and about. Individuals with schizophrenia can be catatonic, where they're not moving. They're sitting in the same position for hours on end. Okay, so that's definitely one that trips students up in terms of talking about positive, negative symptoms of schizophrenia. So make sure to spend some time looking at that. Okay. So I'll pause here. Questions about this specific question? All right, so let's keep going.
Can
If
you
we need to
say
come back
that
to this
again?
one.
My Wi-Fi just totally okay. I think my Wi-Fi is just cutting out.
Okay, sorry, I missed your question. I couldn't quite hear you.
No, that's totally fine. My Wi-Fi keeps cutting out, and I was wondering what the what negative symptoms of schizophrenia meant. Again, you said something about a lack of, and that's all I heard.
So negative symptoms of schizophrenia, so I'm glad you're asking for the clarification, is a lack of healthy behaviors. So we would say, you know, you want to be moving and up and about. Being motionless is a negative symptom because it's not doing something that's beneficial. Does that make sense? Did you get the response?
I think I might have to pop back on because my Wi-Fi is not working.
Okay, so let me catch you after class. I'll make sure you're squared away on it.
I think thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I know technical stuff is hard to work with sometimes. All right, let's keep us rolling in. Demonstrating schizophrenia. You guys can pick up on that in terms of she's kind of being delusional in terms of thinking that aliens of another planet have removed her stomach. Okay, so you guys got that one done well, very nicely done. Generalized anxiety disorder is kind of feeling this constant stress, kind of constant anxiety, and you can't necessarily tie it to any specific thing. So hence why it's that generalized piece. Okay, so very nicely done on this one. Let's keep us going since we did so well. So nicely done, guys. Perfect. Making sure that you understand the difference between anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, and the different eating disorders and kind of their different components to it. So this idea also of binge eating. Okay, so nicely done there. Make sure you kind of pay close attention to these eating disorders and the differences between them. Okay, so good job. Got done reviewing OCD, both in terms of talking about it, but then focus on a bit more in terms of therapy of it. Again, she's got the obsessive intrusive thoughts that pop up. That's part of that obsessive compulsive disorder. Okay, so nicely done here. She's spending that time trying to get these thoughts to go away. All right, so getting into the last third of the questions here. psychodynamic, remember, we have to kind of go back and review that, is the idea that we have kind of these inner forces, and these inner forces then develop into who we are. The psychodynamic perspective is saying, well, we need to think about, well, what are these forces, and how might they be demonstrating themselves? And much of it is thought about in terms of these unconscious influences that we have. And so when it's unconscious, it starts to get towards this displaced response to a repressed impulsion. So this repressed impulsion is that there's some kind of underlying desire or motivation to act a particular way. Okay, so remember, when we think about psychodynamic, we're thinking about these inner drives, these inner motivations, and this kind of internal conflict an individual has. So that's where we get the answer here in terms of the displaced response to incompletely repressed impulses. So we pause at this point because this is when we didn't quite get right, to see if that explanation makes sense or if you have other questions related to it. All right, so we come back to it if we need to. Let's go ahead and go on to our next question. Psychological theories and therapeutic methods is said to have an eclectic approach, meaning that they're taking multiple different perspectives and applying that. So eclectic means kind of a variety of different ideas and thinking. And so that's in fact what's going on in this case. It may be that they involve humanistic therapy, client-centered therapy, all of those different pieces. It really is an eclectic approach, meaning that they're working to do the best they can to fit the needs of that particular client. So this is where we get into both the biological piece, we get into the cognitive piece, the behavioral piece, whatever the client needs. An eclectic therapist who uses different approaches will address it with these multiple different perspectives. Okay, so something we talked about kind of at the beginning of the therapy section in module 42. So make sure you kind of go back and review that because it seems like one that we're just a little bit shaky on, but I think you'll pick it up quickly when you see it again. On to our next question. Covering this with both looking at our mom with OCD, talking about it before with tough guy afraid of dogs. Perfect. You guys have it. Great job. Seems like we're a little rough with the psychodynamic therapy, so make sure that you're spending a little time with this. The idea in this case is that we talked about during this free association therapy where the client kind of talks about their different feelings, kind of talks about things out loud with any real type of direction, that a therapist will look to see if the client starts talking about something and then changes gears quickly. So maybe they're talking about school and then they quickly change to, you know, maybe some TV show that they like. And the idea here is that the therapist is going to say, well, that's indicating resistance, meaning maybe there's some issue with school and how school is going, and the client is resistant to talk about that. And so maybe there's some underlying stressors going on with that. So that's the idea behind Sabrina changing her focus in this case, is that she might be demonstrating resistance, where she's not comfortable talking about something, meaning maybe there's some underlying difficulties there. Okay, so spend some time before the exam reviewing psychodynamic therapy a little bit. And again, as always, once you review that, if you have questions, let me know. Let's keep us rolling here. This client-centered therapy, which is characteristic of humanistic therapy, is really predicated on making sure the client feels unconditional acceptance, so that the client can start to process things so they're not feeling judged, helping them to model that positive behavior, being accepting of oneself. That's really the focus behind this client-centered therapy, of really kind of enabling the client to reach out, be successful. And a big component of that is not judging that client. So that's why we kind of get into this idea here that client-centered therapy involves, most importantly, making the client feel comfortable. Okay? And that's a big piece towards a good therapeutic technique. In fact, if you are involved in any therapy and the therapist doesn't make you feel comfortable, usually that's a mismatch, and that's something you want to address, potentially changing therapist or talk with the therapist about it. All right. Okay. And into our last question. Again, cognitive behavioral basically translates to thinking and acting. And so that's exactly what we have here as we define that cognitive behavioral therapy. Okay, so you guys know this one well. Did really well with the cognitive behavioral piece. All right, so here's our final scoreboard. So nicely done to all you guys that participated.